some of these things I kind of talked about yesterday, I'll sort of zip through them in a bit of detail. Obviously, the Vision Zero program started officially in January of this year. We had our official launch, our vision and focus. I talked the other day a little bit about traffic-related fatalities, so I don't want to kind of go over the same materials again. But really, I want to focus in, again, sort of talked about how we're going to go about achieving our goals in terms of Vision Zero. Obviously talk about the 3 E's in terms of engineering, education, and enforcement, and mostly, you know, technology and the role that technology plays with respect to that as well. So just kind of moving specifically into the red light camera program itself. So what is the red light camera program? Again, just to kind of put us all on the same level playing field. Essentially, it's whenever a car runs a red light, we've got an automated system that takes a photograph of the vehicle running the red light. We get basically the license plate, the back license plate of the vehicle, so it's the owner of the vehicle that's charged, not the person who's actually driving. Obviously, the purpose of this is to reduce angle collisions. As we all know as practitioners, angle collisions basically result in probably the most serious types of collisions and often result in fatalities. And so again, you can see the direct correlation there in terms of why this program is so heavily, such an important element of our Vision Zero road safety plan as well. So just a little bit about red light camera history in Ontario. As I mentioned, the program has been in operation for just over 2 decades. Started with a pilot permission from the province back in 1998. Which then expanded to, in 2004, we had 6 municipalities that were officially permitted by the province to basically run with the red light camera program. In 2010, recognizing the severity of angle collisions and the severity of the issue, I should say, with respect to that, the province increased the fines from $180 to $325 per red light camera offense. So now, moving all the way up to 2017, we went from the pilot to 6 municipalities, and now we're all the way up to 8 municipalities, including the City of Toronto, that are all participating within the red light camera program here in Ontario. There's currently about 205 intersections, although that's kind of changing as we speak. Apologies. As we're just going through the transition between our previous contract and a new contract with respect to the red light camera program. There's currently 77 red light cameras in operation in Toronto specifically, of that 205. But I'm very happy to say just recently we got permission from our local city council to expand upon that, to basically retain the cameras from the previous phase of the red light camera program, essentially doubling our program. So by the end of this year, we'll have in the City of Toronto roughly about 150 sites. In terms of program management, at the top of the pyramid is the province of Ontario. So the province basically regulates the program, and they basically provide us with a license plate ownership information, so we have the ability to lay charges. The City of Toronto, we basically manage the Joint Processing Centre on behalf of the other municipalities, and so we basically put out a contract on behalf of the other municipalities to a red light camera vendor, who then is basically responsible. So it's sort of like the red light cameras are sort of rented from the vendor. Oh, thank you, appreciate that. 1 second. Sort of like the red light cameras are basically rented from the vendor. They're responsible for maintaining the cameras, and in parallel with that, they're also responsible for collecting the data from the cameras that's then used to actually play the charges. As I mentioned, part of my unit within Traffic Safety Unit is the Joint Processing Centre. We have 11 provincial offences officers who every day go through and review the images to basically process and lay charges. And then again, a very critical part of the program as well too is our court services and legal services, where they basically deal with any of the charges that are basically filed on a municipal level. So it's not just the court services within the City of Toronto, it's basically the court services of all the respective municipalities that are involved through that whole process. So in terms of managing the program, this is a very simplified version of the org chart of the Traffic Safety Unit that I manage. Obviously, we have a road safety planning and delivery group. Those 2 groups are basically focused very heavily on in terms of planning and delivery of the Vision Zero road safety plan that I spoke about the other day. I also have the Big Data Innovation Group, which comes in very handy in terms of data collection and really, really looking innovatively of how we look at data and how we analyze data, whether from a congestion perspective or from a safety perspective. But in this context here, I sort of highlighted in red our Automated Enforcement Group, the Joint Processing Centre, which basically manages the red light camera program on behalf of the entire province of Ontario. So here I'm just going to talk a little bit about the technology in terms of how, the physical layout of the intersection. You can see down in the corner there, our traffic controller cabinet. We've got the pole with the housing with the red light camera unit itself. We've got a flash pole, which is just immediately downstream of that. And we've got our loop detectors. And so essentially, the system is connected to the traffic controller and knows when the light has been turned red. And essentially, if a vehicle traverses over the loops at a certain speed, once the lights have turned red, it then triggers the system within that field of image to basically snapshot the photograph. And everything is timed in sequence such that even the delay in terms of when the image is taken is precise, to the point where every single photograph we get is identical in terms of where the vehicle is spaced before and after, in terms of being able to actually lay that charge. Just want to speak a little bit about this whole idea of continuity of evidence, because this is very, very critical to, as I say, the success of the program, is the fact that throughout the entire process, there's no opportunity for the video images to be tampered with. Because as you can imagine, all it takes is one single complaint against whether or not the evidence has been tampered with anywhere in the province, and that could trigger a cascading effect of precedence, which means that even in Toronto or any other municipality, suddenly those charges are no longer valid. So just to kind of run you through really quickly through the process, you can imagine as the system takes the image, it stores it all locally. Our vendor goes out with a USB stick. They pull the information off the USB stick. They then put it into a lockbox, which even the vendor doesn't have the ability to go back into. That lockbox of all those USB sticks is then delivered directly to one of our provincial offenses officers, who in turn has a key, is the only one who has the key, who then has the ability to take those images, load them on the central system, and then basically review the images. So it's very, very low tech, and it's one of the things that we often come under criticism for, saying, well, why don't you use the internet or any of these other types of systems to make the system more cost effective? Well, the reality is, if there's any opportunity whatsoever for that evidence to be tampered with, it basically raises challenges in court and basically could result in the downfall of the entire program. So it's very, very critical for us to maintain this continuity of evidence throughout. Just want to talk a little bit about technology. And by the way, as I'm talking about this, sort of the backdrop to everything I'm saying is the fact that the province recently passed legislation with respect to speed enforcement in Ontario. And so kind of the theme, the organizers wanted me to really kind of emphasize this to you guys, is kind of the theme of what I'm going to talk about is what are the elements of the red light camera program that make it successful, that you can kind of envision would find their way into the speed enforcement program. Likewise, if it's to be equally successful. So here I talk a little bit about just the technology and the fact that the province actually regulates the exact specific make and model of cameras to be used. So it's not a case of each municipality using their own camera technology. It has to be the one that's actually regulated by the municipality. And this is critical in terms of ensuring consistency between the various municipalities in operation. In terms of image privacy, I kind of touched on this a little bit, but with the red light camera program, we don't take images from the front of the vehicle. We don't look at the driver at all to avoid any kind of privacy issues. The images are taken of the back of the vehicle, so we're basically getting the license plate. But because we're getting the license plate and we're not seeing the person in the car to deal with the privacy issue, we're not charging the owner of the vehicle, we're not charging rather the driver, we're charging the owner of the vehicle. And that's very critical, because I know certain jurisdictions elsewhere in the world that have similar red light camera programs where they try to charge the driver at the time. There's all kinds of challenges associated with that. I wasn't the one who was driving, and these types of things. So again, this is one of the key things that kind of led to the success of the program. Also, the use of static signs. So albeit it's not specifically regulated per se, but as part of the agreement that we have with the province of Ontario in terms of operating the red light camera program, they have stipulated that they want us to put signs. So imagine if the red light camera is only on one leg of the intersection. We actually have red light cameras on all 4 approaches to the intersection. And again, it's not about surprising people. It's not about catching people off guard. The idea is we want the public to know that there's a red light camera in operation at that location. And again, if you're violating, then there's kind of no excuse, right? So again, this diagram here, for your reference, just kind of gives you a bit of a walkthrough in terms of the general process. So as I mentioned beforehand, the driver runs a red light. Camera takes the photographic evidence. We've got our contractor who basically picks up those images, delivers it to the provincial offenses officer back in my office. Then the license plate owner has the option then to either pay or challenge in court once the charges have been laid and passed on. So if they choose to pay, well then you see the red box there, it's basically done. But if they choose to challenge, because it is a POA offense, then the provincial offenses officers in our joint processing center then prepare the disclosure packages, which then goes off to the courts, and they basically then deal with the hearings from that point on. And it's up to the court at that point as to whether or not charges should remain or if they should be dropped, kind of thing. But I can certainly argue on behalf of the courts that, again, because of the years and years that we've been in operation, and we've made a very, very kind of solid, airtight kind of program, for example, technically speaking, it is possible that our provincial offenses officers could be called in to testify in a court, if someone's really kind of challenging this. But in my years, and maybe even going back to the previous manager, I think there's only been one instance over the past 20 years where we've ever been challenged to the point of an officer being called in. Because again, the evidence that we have, the continuity of evidence as well too, is just so defensible and airtight that you just can't get out of it. So the advice in Ontario is if you're running a red light camera, just pay the ticket. So I just want to talk a little bit about the benefits of the program. Before I jump into specific numbers, the key thing is we do publish the number of charges per camera site, so you can go on our Traffic Safety Unit webpage and actually download that information. But quite frankly, we prefer to look specifically at the changes in terms of collisions rather than the number of charges. Because the number of charges at a particular camera site do vary for a whole variety of different factors. If I can give one example, if there's construction, at that location where the red light camera is, it could be taken out of commission for maybe part of the year or maybe the whole year, and so the numbers seem to drop relative to the previous year. Then you look at the next year when the camera's back in operation, the numbers jump back up again. So there's all kinds of things like that that can happen where if you're just looking at the raw data, you may be looking and saying, hey, it seemed like your red light camera was working, and all of a sudden the charges start to go back up again. Well, that's because that was the one year where for 3 or 4 weeks or maybe a month or two it was offline. So rather than looking at charges, we prefer to look at the change in terms of fatal collisions, the change in terms of injury collisions, and the reductions in terms of angle collisions overall. And on that note, we recently did a review as part of that staff report to council in terms of retaining the cameras, where we've seen basically now a 40% reduction in terms of traffic-related fatalities, which is phenomenal given our Vision Zero focus, and a 23% reduction in terms of traffic-related injuries as well too, and double-digit reductions in terms of angle collisions. And again, I say that only because as you go on a location-by-location basis, for one location, let's say we had 15 or 16 angle collisions prior to the red light camera going in. Now we're seeing 1 or 2 kind of idea. So it's that order of magnitude. The other stat that I don't put down here, but it's also very important to recognize, is the halo effect that we've been seeing. At a number of these red light camera sites, we've actually seen that it's one thing to say that the angle collisions at that location have been reducing, but we're also seeing the angle collisions at surrounding intersections being reduced as well too. And again, that comes as no surprise given the signage that the province has asked us to enact. So just in terms of lessons learned, the success of the program really stems, as I mentioned beforehand, from the whole consistency of the equipment that's being used, the continuity of evidence aspect of things, and the benefits of us having a single joint processing center. So again, there's consistency across the board in terms of how the province is rolling out, is administering this program. So in terms of the opportunities for automated speed enforcement in Ontario, so on May 30th of this year, so again, it was literally just a few weeks ago, the province of Ontario just passed Bill 65, the Safer School Zones Act, which amends the Highway Traffic Act, and it really gives us 3 things. And these are 3 hats off to the province. This is fantastic legislation. I'm looking at my provincial friends in the audience. Number 1, it basically enables us to accept photographic images for speeding charge violations again. It's basically reenacting photo radar. It enables the introduction of us using automated speed enforcement specifically in school zones or in community safety zones. And again, this year, as I mentioned yesterday in my presentation, unfortunately, given the fatalities we've been seeing now in terms of school-aged children, school zones and safety in school zones is going to be a very, very heavy emphasis this year in terms of our Vision Zero road safety plan. And lastly, this isn't touted that much, but it's very, very critical and important as well too, is this whole idea of the default speeds and municipalities' ability to basically set their own default speeds, which again will play very heavily into our plans with respect to the Vision Zero road safety plan. So how does it affect us in terms of the road safety plan? So some of you may recall from my presentation yesterday, the 6 emphasis areas. There's really the 3 key areas that we feel that this kind of affects. I'm not going to go through in this grave detail, but obviously in terms of safe school zones, we have the ability to implement automated speed enforcement. Within our senior safety zones that we're going to be establishing, we have the ability to co-designate these as community safety zones, and by default then have the capability of putting automated speed enforcement within those. And then lastly, just in general, this kind of backdrop to everything, the whole idea of aggressive driving and distraction. Again, any locations that we basically designated as community safety zones, we'd have the opportunity to implement automated speed enforcement. So that's basically it. Thank you.